Can everyone hear me? There we go. Hauka. My name is Johnny Bear Contreras. I'm from the Sample Squaw Band in Valley Center. Very happy and very excited and proud to be narrating this panel today. It's been some time coming, and I have some incredible creatives, Native sisters and brothers to my left, and I'd like to read their bios and introduce them, and for us to move forward in this in a good way. Chag Lowry is Yurok, Maidu, and Pit River, ancestry from Northern California. He publishes comics and books about California Native cultures and histories through his imprint called Original Voices. He is the author of award-winning graphic novel Soldiers Unknown and has collaborated with Tówla artist Weisho Alverte on the comics titled My Sisters and Where the Water Flows Strong. He has directed multiple PBS documentaries and currently works in the School of Public Health at UC San Diego. He and his son Mateo collaborated on the science fiction comic titled Reflections. Another hand for Jake. Next we have Camaray Davalos. Graduated from Humboldt State University in 2018, majoring in Native American Studies and minoring in Environmental Management. In 2023, she was honored to receive the Achievement in Screenwriting Award at the 12th Annual Native American Media Awards at LA Skins Fest. She is a lead editor for Yáamay, an anthology of feminine perspectives across Indigenous California, which is published in the fall of 2023. Avelaka, Wólnish, Macarro is of the Pechanga Band of Indians. She graduated from UC Berkeley in 2018, majoring in both media studies, emphasis in journalism, and film and media studies. She has recently worked at the University of Washington as the CELE Assistant Director of Tribal and Rural Relations, overseeing the Riverways Educational Partnerships Program, and as the American Indian Alaska Native Admissions Counselor. Macarro is a lead editor for Yáamay, an anthology of feminine perspectives across Indigenous California, which was published in fall 2023. Lauren earned a Bachelor's of Art degree in history from CSUSB. By pursuing her degree, she helped preserve and achieve thousands of historical documents, established a library and research space at the Dorothy Ramon Learning Center, and went on to become a founding member of the Pechanga's Great Oak Press in 2014. Since its founding, Lauren has played a pivotal role in the publication of 22 titles. Currently, she serves as director, editor-in-chief of the Great Oak Press, and is a champion for Native voices. Let's arrange. At this point, we'd like to have a reading.
Yeah. Miriam Motong Avelaka Macarro Yaka, Bi Payongkuish Pechanga. Hello everyone, my name is Avelaka Macarro. I am from the Pechanga Band of Luiseño Indians, since we are on Kumeyaay lands, we thought it would be most appropriate to first do an acknowledgement of the lands that have been stolen from these people, from our relations, as well as do a reading to kind of set the tone for what this book and what these projects are about. So our reading is Regeneration by Marlena Dusek, who is Payongkuish from Kumeyaay, as well as a number of other bands in California. Take me to the lands where the chaparral, oak woodlands, prairies, and the forest understory are burned in a traditional cycle. The lands during springtime, Yulalash, deergrass, and many other plant ancestors regenerate from Kut, fire, in the fall. The lands where my ancestors' DNA remains after managing for generations. Tutu, grandmother, told me that you have to have strong materials for your basket. You must pray, sing, and manage with Kut. I was hoping you could take me to the lands where the oaks are healthy and the acorns are bug-free. The lands where the seeds need coot to germinate. The lands where coot has nourished Tamayawood's Earth Mother's soils, where water cycles thrive. Notice how I don't say wildfire. That's a different concept, you see. Our Tahum have a word, kumisa, meaning exposed to fire and smoke for too long, or a wildfire, a high-intensity fire, more detrimental than the coot I speak of. Wildfire hit these lands with colonizers starting in 1542. The chaparral got thicker, the forest understory became crowded. Dangerous levels of fuel were built and different managing styles are now on lands so broken up and divided. Consequences our elders told us would come from constant extraction and mistreatment of the Mayowood. I say coot not to scare you, but to remind you that this relationship is an old one, a natural one. Regeneration of many cycles are dependent upon coot for existence. Our peoples have always been in tune with this. The lands that I speak of are right here. We must repair this balance, this way of living. We must regenerate the land.
What is Great Oak Press? And since we're here to honor and discuss two of the books that we published, Soldiers Unknown by Chag Lowry and Yáamay, and these are the lead editors of Yáamay. So Great Oak Press, this is a picture of myself and my coworker Desiree Wetz at SIVA, which is the California Indian Basket Weavers Association conference. And we have our lovely books in front of us. We're a tribally owned press started by the Pechanga Band in 2014. So we're celebrating our 10-year anniversary this year. Very proud of that. As you'll see in the presentation, we do things a little differently at our press, and we're very proud of that. And so I'd like to go ahead and just talk a little bit about like the structure of our press. So one of the things that's quite different is our editorial board is made up of people from our cultural resources department. They help aid sensitivity readers, fact checkers, language speakers, professionals in Indigenous studies. And our executive board is made up of our tribal council. So we look to them for guidance and approval when moving forward with our projects. One of the things that's really unique about our press is that we were never created to be profitable. We were created because we had a mission in mind, and that was to create a platform for Indigenous authors and artists. And so making money is not our main goal. Our main goal is to be advocates for Indigenous voices and publish works that are important to Indigenous peoples. So that's what makes us stand out.
Yeah, so why did we create Yáamay? So as you know, I was a Native American Studies major up at Humboldt State, and throughout all of my courses, we're reading a lot of different materials, and I noticed that there was a large gap in sources by Southern California Native people. We're reading a lot of stuff by Native folks from all over the country, especially Northern California, which is awesome, but nothing really from SoCal natives. So, I realized that there was this gap, that really needed to be filled. And so after graduating, came back down home, and I knew that our tribe had Great Oak Press. So I was like, why don't we create something awesome, uplift our local Indigenous women of SoCal, share our perspectives, our real histories finally, because some of the realities are, unfortunately, some of our own Native people I've heard say, Southern California Native folks don't have culture anymore, which is really hurtful and false, and if they're thinking that and saying that, then what are non-Native people thinking and saying about us, right? So, so that was kind of how Yáamay came to be is this understanding that we need more perspectives and primary source materials with our voices, telling our joys, our triumphs, our real histories, everything in between. So, yeah, I don't know, Avelaka, if you want to.
And for context, like Lauren said, the Great Oak Press is not really about creating works for money. But even more than that, when it came to this project, since it is an anthology, it was a lot of work to find people from our own reservation, from other Southern California tribes, to have contribution. And Cami and I, and our cousin Rebecca, who is another lead editor that unfortunately wasn't able to join us, we just started sending people text messages, doing posts on Facebook, eventually Instagram, and this process took about 5 years from the initial, production of the three of us kind of working on like, what do we want this to be? How do we get those pieces? How do we format the book? We were in very different places, right? This is pre-pandemic. I was still in college. Cami was still in college when we were first talking about the project. And then I had just moved up to Seattle for my work at UW. And this became kind of the tether, I think, for all of us who were at very different places in our life. Rebecca was living in LA. Cami, like she said, was in Humboldt. And so we had this kind of thing that brought us back together and brought us back to our tribe. And I think because of that mentality and the fact that we are cousins, we are in our relations, we were able to kind of push forward of like, it's not just a passion project, it's something that we needed for ourselves, which I think it happens so often when it comes to Indigenous work, right? There's very rarely a voice that's made outside of our own. And that's the beauty of the press as well, is that we have complete control over the narrative that's being produced, right? There's, I think, a wonderful push right now for Native representation in media. Marvel has 2 Native characters, right? Right now there's a push online to make Wolverine Native because he is from Canada and there is potential for him to be a First Nations person, right? These are things that, for myself, right, I love Comic-Con, so this is a massive deal for me, but thinking of this media representation, it's still in the confines of what that big budget looks like, right? And because we're coming from a place of this matters to us because it's for us, that makes a huge difference in what we're able to produce, as well as the care for people that are purchasing the books, right? And there's been so many times where we'll have these events, not just with our own tribe, but with different tribes all over California, with youth, with queer folks. We were at a Pride event recently, and just seeing how much that representation matters as well. I think, the idea that you can do it for yourself makes a really big difference, and especially when it's able to be published, top to bottom, it's Native work, right? The design on the outside, the works inside, the intention, all of that is with Indigenous mindset. And a lot of these are amateur writers, right? This is the first time for most of our contributors to have published anything. And I think that made a huge difference for us also.
Wonderful. Are we on slide 8 now?
Mm-hmm.
Normalizing Native languages.
Yeah, so something that's really special about Yáamay and just working with Great Oak Press in general is we have the freedom to include our Indigenous language. And something that I've talked about with a Canadian Indigenous poet recently, she was telling me how when she was writing her book with her publisher that there was pushback for including her native language, which I just thought was interesting because, we never faced any of that when working with Great Oak Press. In fact, it was more like, how can we fit this more native language in the book? Like, let's put it in the intro, let's put it in the chapter pages, as you see right here with Wólnish. So Lauren really encouraged us to use our native language whenever possible, and that was really validating as a Native person. And so, if you work in publishing, I really encourage you, if you're working with Native authors, to allow them that freedom. Like let them use their native language. It's so special and it's just so important to do. So
I think like the big key here too is respect for people's cultures, respect for their languages, and doing the best that you can do in your position to make that realization, that inclusion of these native languages in these publications, because sometimes it's not easy, right? And so we have this line here, font creation, adaptation, things like that. Because some of these characters, especially when we're looking at Tówla, which is the language that's spoken at Pechanga, there's characters that don't exist in typical typefaces and fonts, and so when you're doing layout and stuff like this, it can be really challenging. And so we've actually had to hire font creators, and develop our own fonts for these special characters. We talk to linguists and people who speak the language, and we're very careful about the inclusion of the languages. We want to get them right, especially as a tribal press. We want to make sure that we're the most authoritative word on these languages, and so, but we value the inclusion of these languages, and I think that's something that's totally different. We are not in the habit of changing narratives. We don't want to do that, and so when I take a look at a piece of work like Yáamay or Soldiers Unknown, my first thoughts are not, oh, this is totally unorganized, we need to change this, we need to remove these languages. No, I'm like, how can we include more of that? And so I think that's important.
Yeah, and just on the point, I think of the language, it's important to note that there's many other projects that the press has come out with. It's not just these two. And the first few ones were actually children's books. And that's been, language revitalization has been a very big push for lots of tribes. It was illegal. It was literally illegal for us to speak any of our language, right? My name, Avelaka, which means beautiful butterfly. That would not be allowed at all, and that, I think it's a massive change. My last name, our family's last name, Macarro, that comes from our great-grandfather changing the name from Macarro from Mukara, which means lunar eclipse, to Macarro, to be accepted in wider society. And so it was really important for us to find a way to include language in a way that not only respected it, as you said, but also is part of that revitalization. Part of the idea of we're telling our own stories and we're also utilizing our own language, but paying respect to our ancestors who were able to maintain and cultivate. That's what Wólnish means, is cultivate. So not just in this idea of we're protecting it, but we're really letting it grow in a different style, in a different way, and developing slang. It's been something that I know a couple of language speakers or keepers have been practicing in the last 20 or so years. And part of that comes with respecting each of the chapters has a quote from Yáamay, which is one of the first publications that features Tówla, which is our tribe's language. And Valana Hyde worked with language revitalizer, a linguist from UC Berkeley in the 70s, and it's literally just discussions. Previously, there were recordings of our language, and that's where a lot of the protection of that language has come, but that was done by outsiders. And a lot of times it was just the recording, they don't know what's going on, they're literally trying to figure out the structure of the language. And Yáamay was the first time where it was, Valana's story, telling those stories of her people, and having that respected in a physical text, which I think, thinking of how Western civilization has kind of, not demolished, but devastated a lot of our tribe's history, not just our tribes, many tribes across the Americas. This is a very big part of that. And so in reclaiming that, having these features of the language, and as well as respect and, keeping that common ground with our ancestors is really important, I think, to the broader story of our indigeneity, and is something that we're always looking towards. And I think that's one of the great things about Chag's piece as well, is looking at how does language fit into the rest of the storytelling.
That was beautiful. Thank you for that insight. Now we'll have slide 9, a different approach to editing.
So I do want to thank you, Johnny. Johnny Contreras has spent probably about a decade almost now working to get Native voices incorporated here at Comic-Con. And I do want to acknowledge Mike Towery here in the audience, who's one of the founders of the con. You might want to stay incognito. I won't have you stand up if you want to. But I thank you too for your efforts to get Indigenous voices, because we are the original storytellers, right? And why not have us be front and center? And I do thank everybody in the audience for choosing to be here instead of next door at that boring G.I. Joe Transformers session. We're way better than G.I. Joe and Transformers. And, you know, sitting here and listening to these ladies who I admire very much and respect very much. And when I think in terms of Native language, you know, our languages contain the discipline and the lessons of cultures and places. And everybody raise your hand who likes to breathe clean air. If you like to breathe clean air, if you like to drink clean water, keep your hand up. Okay? So a lot of the knowledge that is in this book, in the languages, in the philosophies and the imagery that is shared, goes to the core of a land relationship that we desperately need to learn from, because there's a huge cauldron fire happening right now, right, in Northern California? Well, that's the result of policies. It's the result of choices, right? And the way to get back to a better place of balance, well, here it is. Here you have it. And how amazing that it is Native women led, because in California, for the most part, most indigenous cultures are matriarchal historically. And you know, the more that we can honor that and integrate that into the disciplines and the telling of stories and the sharing of lessons, right? Hopefully policies will change and society will be healthier. We will just be healthier if we listen and incorporate the lessons that are in a book like this. And so my book is about World War I. It's based on my Yurok people's experiences in the war. The Yurok up north, they are the largest indigenous tribe in California. And then also on my father's side, I'm Maidu and Pit River from northeastern California. We had a lot of, we've had generations of men and women serve in the U.S. military. The first experience in the military was in World War I, which was 1917, 1918, and Native people were not even U.S. citizens at that point in time, which I always, it always blew my mind. And so I had worked with the artist Rasan Ekadal for a little over 3 years to create this book, and we were at the tail end, and I happened to meet Lauren, and I really appreciate her leadership at the press and her kindness, and because I've always been stubborn, I don't care for editors. I produce my own work, right? And my people are my editors. They vet my work before it comes out. And that's kind of a different approach, right? When you talked about the structure. As Native people, we deserve to own every aspect of the structure that produces our stories. And for such a long time, we have not been able to own that structure. And so this is very historic. You are sitting in a very historic place right now, because this is the first pop culture presentation, right, about the Great Oak Press in the state, right? So I very much appreciate you doing that, because now you're part of the story, right? And our work community editing, community relationships are very important, right? It means you have a responsibility for the characters that you create, the words that you put out, the images that you craft and share. And so we have that responsibility. I think there's a slide in the next 2 or 3 where I like to say, this isn't vanity work. We're not there yet, right? I can't write series 10 of Wolverine after the first 9 series have been canceled because of crappy writing, right? I don't have that ability. I have to produce top-notch work every time and be careful in my community all the time that it represents us in a good way, and I have to be approachable as much as possible too. That's another, I think, unique aspect of being a native editor or writer. No worries. And so that's part of the editing that I wanted to share.
Beautiful, beautiful. So now we'll move on to slide 10, native languages are not foreign.
I wanted to jump in and just say one thing about this particular page, Chag, is the decision to not translate the Yurok language here or the German language throughout the book. That was a conscious decision that Chag made and something I supported. And I don't think that this scene necessarily needs translation. I think that when you have something like a graphic novel, these emotions of an elder talking to a younger person, someone who's being taught to be a community leader and things like this, these are things that are transcending cultures and languages. She's saying goodbye to Charlie, and they're having this very serious conversation, and so there's no need to translate it. And if you do speak Yurok, you're also getting something very special here because you understand it. But I just wanted to mention that.
Yeah, thank you. I don't know how many of you, when you've read comics, and there's a language other than English, and then they put the little translation box at the bottom in the panel. I always hated that. I thought it was just a distraction, right? And so if people want to know what was said in that language, look it up. We have Google now, we can do that. I read comics in the 70s and 80s, so right, there was no Google, right? You'd have to learn the language. But there's an element of, pushing the reader a little bit. Like, everything doesn't have to be always explained. No one explains American culture to me as a native person, right? I have to walk out the door and figure things out every day. And so my way of kind of flipping that is, we don't need a little translation box every time we share as native people. Sometimes mystery is good. Sometimes questions unanswered are the best part of a comic, really, in my mind.
Thank you, thank you. Slide 10, native languages are not foreign.
Yeah, so going off of Chag, what Chag's saying, we made a conscious decision early on with Yáamay to not put any of the native words in italics, because I feel like usually when you see a foreign word or a non-English word, it's italicized. And with our language, with Jamtela, this is a language that's been on this continent for thousands of years before English. We're not going to otherize it. We want it to be just as normal as English is, right? So, it might seem like a really small detail with these italics, but, I think it does make a wider impact, in the end. And then also kind of going off the translation thing, we also talked about possibly including, a glossary or dictionary at the end of Yáamay, but ultimately decided against it for a few reasons. And one of them being you guys are smart. You guys understand as readers, you can read between the lines, you understand the context. And another thing too is just, we've had so much of our culture, of our language appropriated and lost. We want to keep some of that knowledge to ourselves. We like a little mystery, as Chag was saying. So, yeah.
Thank you for that. Slide 11 is books created with intention.
Yeah, so I think Avelaka touched on this earlier too. We have a lot of children's books that we've developed, and like Chag was saying, one of our slides, these are not vanity projects. We create these books with intention. These books are used in our Achumawi school, which is on our reservation. The children are learning the language, they're immersed in it. The teachers have to know the language to be able to teach at the school. And so this is something really beautiful and powerful that we're doing, but we're not stopping there. We have been in discussion with the school districts. We're trying to change the curriculum. That is our ultimate goal, right? We want to correct the narrative that has been told time and time again by non-Native people. And so it's really powerful what we're doing. This is a cute little bookshelf of some of our children's books. But in our children's books, we also make conscious decisions not to translate certain words, like Moila, which is moon, in Goodnight Pechanga. We don't translate it, we leave it, because Moila is a person in the culture, same with Temet. And so we want to encourage non-Native speaking people to read those words, not to just gloss over them and skip over them, but to really reflect on those words, think about it, and think about the people that are writing them. So, and we also, in our literature, want to represent Native people in a positive way. I think that's really important. So often, history is written by non-Native people, and Native people are represented in not such a great way. And so we have books like Sitting Rock and the Rock That Became a Mountain. It's about a young boy coming of age and going through ceremony. Desiree does a really wonderful job of painting this boy in a positive light so that our youth can see this child and see themselves in that image. So again, really beautiful.
Beautiful, thank you. Next slide is designs with cultural significance.
Yeah, so, I feel like Yáamay has a kind of avant-garde approach to its layout and design that I haven't seen in too many anthologies. And with us, when we're discussing its creation, we really wanted the layout and design to reflect the land that we come from. So on this page, Thieved, you'll see in that corner, there's some oak leaves from the oak tree, which is really vital to our livelihood over here in SoCal as Native people. And maybe on another page, you'll see an aerial image of some of our sacred islands. They're really subtle. We don't want them to compete with the actual pieces in the book. But they're a nod to who we are and where we come from, and same with the color palette, like a lot of golds, oranges, tans, like especially for inland where we are, it's kind of dry. It's like the color of the clay and the earth that we come from. So that was really important to us, and it feels just very special because it feels like the book itself is a piece of art, not just the pieces inside of it. So working with Great Oak Press, having that creative freedom was so awesome to, just play around with and have fun.
Yeah, I think a lot of other publishers would take the manuscript and then, okay, we got it from there, and the authors sometimes don't have any say about what the cover looks like or what the layout looks like. And that's something that we do a little bit differently. I want our authors to contribute to that. I want you to open this book and hear Camaray's voice as you're reading her page. And so, again, just having them on board from the very beginning all the way through to the printing stage. And when we can, like with Chag's book, when it's feasible, we try to be conscious about who we use as a printer as well. Like we use Tribal Print Source for Chag's book, which is a printing company down out of Paula. And so, again, just those conscious decisions that we're making as a publisher to try to change the Western way of doing things, I guess. Jim, you want to talk about Seven Sisters?
Just real quick, I very much appreciate when I brought the cover to Soldiers to Lauren, and she, there was no changes made, really even suggested. She just was like, wow, that's amazing. And, the color red is significant in French culture and is significant in Yurok culture. Color red is very significant in a lot of Native cultures, and so I wanted that to be prominent on this because it is about war. And the man in the the headpiece, that's regalia that we use in a ceremony in Yurok culture, and it revolves around the health of the world, the balancing, the rebalancing of the world. And then I'm going to contrast that with the role that he was forced into, the soldier's role, and that war is the breakdown of everything, right? It's the complete opposite of the ceremony that those young men were being trained to have a role in before being forced to go into combat. And designs with cultural significance. Again, I like in the book. There are many subtle pieces to it that unless you sit at from 5 to 6 during Comic-Con on Friday afternoon, you'll never know. And so for this, since you all are here, I'll share just one. So when you go out and buy the book, and I don't mind you buying my book, or even 2 copies of my book. But if you look on the upper corner here, and I don't know if you can see it on there, but they're real subtle, are the 7 sisters. And we call them the Big Dipper, right? The star. In Yurok culture, there are 7 sisters that go up and they dance and they pray every night for the people, for the good health of the people. And so, like someone who buys this off the shelf, they're not going to know that. They might not even see it. But you all now know that. And so that's something that, again, I love the mystery. It's all throughout the book, too. There's just subtle things. And that's what I was taught by basket weavers and language speakers. That again, mystery is great. It doesn't have to be all linear. It doesn't have to be, oh, well, hey, I read it and now I know it. You can feel it for a long time and question it for a very long time. And I think that incorporates an indigenous perspective.
I love that piece, just because I love this design so much, but I really quickly want to acknowledge our designers, Alexis Manoa Dyer, who is Pechanga from Pechanga, and her husband, Andrew Dyer. They did a fantastic job, and again, just the layers of design and how that impact, I think, between the two, and again, this is a credit to Lauren, of really emphasizing, what is the meaning behind these choices. So for this one, it's, look to the sides, and it's our mountain that's behind us. That's where our creation story is, and that's kind of the initial design for this ridge on the back. And then I love having the elderberry kupot in the front, which is medicinal plant used for many different ceremonies, for actual medicine. But just this idea of the book is good medicine for you also, right? It's so invigorating, re-energizing. It could save you a copy.
I have a quick question for you. When you say Ponkoish, is that similar to, we say Kumeyaay instead of Ingenio? So instead of Lucenio, it's Ponkoish.
Yeah, so Bayonkoish. So Bayonkoish is, one person from, it's people of the West, person of the West, and then people of the West would be Bayonkoichum. And again, this is part of that language revitalization that our tribe has ongoing process. We were the Pechanga band of Mission Lucenio Indians, or Lucenio Mission Indians. Now it's the Pechanga Band of Indians as our official federally recognized names. These names were not chosen by us directly, right? There's that process of we are of Pechanga. But really trying to, again, use the word Chamdela. When I was growing up, we only said Lucenio, in the same way that we're Indians, we're not Indigenous. There's just all of these different mental shifts, and again, it's that invitation to learn and to know that I think is so much of that mystery, right? The language is a part of us, and so it's really a sacred thing to know and understand it, which I really appreciate, I think, in all the copies of, where there isn't that translation piece. It's an invitation to learn, as opposed to us forcefully telling you or saying that you deserve to even know it, right? This is, we're allowing it to happen. And part of that is, of course, digging on your own. We're It's never been part of the process for Indigenous peoples to have things given to us, and so much of that is kind of returning the favor of, if you would like to learn, you must ask beforehand.
Thank you, thank you. Now we move on to more than human characters.
Sure, and I know we only have about 8 or 9 minutes left, so I'm going to go quick. This is, in the story, the main character gets knocked unconscious from an artillery shell. And when he wakes up, he sees Frog, and Frog is she, guides him to water that is safe to drink. And in my book, there's a page in here, when you buy it, you'll see subliminal messaging. You'll see, it looks like a blank page. And this is after he gets knocked unconscious, but really, if you look real closely, there's the 7 sisters in here, the points of light. And they're the ones that bring Frog to him, bring him back to this place. So he was in no man's land, and I always was fascinated by that concept of no man's land, right? So who's gonna really guide him? It's the sisters. It's Frog, who is female. So we just wanted to share that real quick.
Thank you, thank you. Slide 14, more than human characters and imagery.
Yeah, so just briefly, I want to talk about the Nava lino cut reduction print. Nava in our language means cactus, and this is by Nicole Vasquez Sutter. And so when we're talking about more than human imagery, in our worldview, these beings, plants, animals, stones, were born before humans. So it's in stark contrast to this Western worldview of like humans up here and then the natural world. And so I just think it's really special, that we take on, it's like humans, we take on the personality traits of the plants, not the other way around. Like we are protective and guarded and vulnerable. Because that's how Nava was in the beginning.
Well, I love the basket is one of my pieces, so it's the one that I love so much, and as well as the abalone. I think that there's this process as well, in the book, and I think for any creatives that are in the audience, when you produce any type of work, that is an extension of yourself. And so it's really when you're working with these materials, I was reminded recently that, the pieces, what you're working with, the tools that you have, those are extensions of who you are. And I think that as Native people, just as much as our words and our stories are extensions of who we are, it's important to recognize that, the non-human entities in our life, we have a note at the beginning. It's a, thanks to our human and non-human relatives. And really maintaining that as part of our process in the creation of these pieces, as well as for many of the other pieces of the creative press, right? These are our stories, and like I said before, our language is a part of us. It is that extension.
Thank you, thank you. And we'll move on to slide 15, responsibility.
Yeah, I can talk about this real quick. This is our dedication page in Yáamay. Mine and Avelaka's great-great-great-grandmother, Leona Kangish, and she, like many other Indigenous ancestors, their life wasn't easy. They faced loss of language, loss of land, boarding school, forced assimilation, and a lot of times these real histories are swept under the rug. And so we feel that with Yáamay, we had this chance to tell that real history and to share our true perspectives, and thinking about responsibility, that feels like we're being responsible descendants, sharing our truth with the world. So yeah.
And making it better for our future generation.
Make it a little bit better.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Chag's cousin with his book here, super cute. And Desiree, she talks a little bit about that in her her piece here, her future. You know, she thinks about her children a lot, and so that's why we do what we do.
Beautiful, beautiful. Slide 16, not a vanity piece.
So this was part of kind of that same process of, again, the responsibility of telling these stories, sharing her language, you know, including what this process is like. You know, when you go through the book, it's Tówla, Wólnish, Shoah, and it's this idea of, you know, our process of being buried, having kind of that growth again, and then looking at what our next steps are. And we wanted to include this part because this is part of the storytelling again. This is by Alexis Manoa Dyer, backwards, and it's, you know, her poem as well as a photo that inspired the poem, where you have this tree stump in the middle of a park that was cut down so that people would have a place to rest, so that they could put a bench and table for anyone that wanted to visit and be in nature, and actively destroying nature, you know, for this to happen, right? Creating these false spaces of the natural world, so that you could be a visitor rather than be in tune and understand that that is their home, that you're entering, right? And so that, again, not so much a vanity piece for us, but really, again, that responsibility of it's our duty as Indigenous people. We are stewards of the land. It is constant work to regain not ownership, but, you know, the ability to have management of the land that we've, you know, been able to sustain and support and be in relation with since time immemorial, right? That is kind of an ongoing process. The book is one piece of that. Having spaces to share our story as well is a bigger piece of that, and you know, allowing that reciprocal experience with all of you. Again, emotional for attending. It makes a massive difference to us that you're able to hear and understand what these projects mean, and how kind of the larger piece of our storytelling isn't finished with the books either.
Thank you, thank you. We'd like to ask, what's next?
Okay, so, well, what's next? We are kind of constantly doing workshops nowadays. It's, again, that part of the responsibility. We want to ensure that this project is shared in a holistic way, working with youth, working on college campuses. These are academic pieces in our minds, right? Everything that we do is teaching the next generation. And so our next one is going to be hosted at UCSD at September 28th. We're also working with California public schools to change the school curriculum throughout the state to include texts like Yáamay in their ethnic studies model curriculums. So really thinking of the broader perspective, how do these pieces fall into the layout of what the story is at large? And so there's several pieces that are going to be included in that model curriculum. We are working on that right now, as well as a film piece that should be available sometime at the end of this year or next year. Again, creatives, you know that it's an ongoing, intense process, but that's something that we're exceptionally excited about, to have multiple mediums to work on. It's a really great experience.
And thank you, everybody. Our session here has come to a conclusion. And we'd like to thank everybody and their time and their energy, but most of all, the panelists that were able to be here today. You're doing your nation proud. Yáamay.